In 1934, contractors bricked off the entire basement of an Ohio farmhouse. No records, no explanation. 91 years later, when the wall was finally broken open, they found what the county archives had tried to erase, and what no church bell ever rang for again. When Thomas Ellery bought the farmhouse outside Chillicothe, Ohio in 2025, he thought he was buying quiet. 40 acres of pasture, a crooked barn, a house older than the Civil War. The kind of place where a man could disappear from the world. But the deed was strange. Names scratched out, signatures missing, property lines redrawn over and over for more than a century. The realtor told him the basement had been sealed during the Depression for safety reasons. But when Thomas asked why the wall looked so new compared to the rest of the house, the man's face went pale. The neighbors didn't help either. Some just shook their heads, muttering, "That place don't keep families long." One old farmer mentioned something called the Ashbell Orphan Home, but wouldn't explain. That night, Thomas went down to the basement with a flashlight. The air was colder there, heavy, metallic. The bricks were rough, built in a hurry, mortar smeared unevenly. As he ran his hand across the wall, his light caught faint scratches. Letters carved by someone's fingertips, half hidden under lime wash. One word, mercy. The beam flickered. Somewhere behind the wall, the silence shifted. Not a groan, not pipes. Something moving, slow and deliberate, on the other side. Thomas turned off the flashlight and stood frozen in the dark. And that's when he realized the house wasn't empty. Thomas tried to convince himself it was just old timber settling, just the natural groan of a house that had endured too many winters. But when the sound came again, soft, deliberate, like knuckles brushing the other side of the wall, his chest tightened. He set down his flashlight and pressed his ear against the brick. At first there was silence. Then, faintly, the rhythm of breath. Slow, uneven, as if something long forgotten was struggling to keep itself alive. He stumbled back, heart hammering. Rationality returned. There couldn't be anything inside. The wall had been sealed for 91 years. Whatever was behind it had long since turned to dust. But the human mind doesn't listen to reason at 2 in the morning. In a house that smells faintly of wet earth and rusted nails. Upstairs, he found the attic door nailed shut. The boards across it were old but not ancient, hammered with a violence that bent the metal flat. In the dust above the lintel, another carved word waited. Forgive. He lay awake in bed until dawn, listening to the silence. Not once did he fall asleep. The next morning, Thomas drove to the Ross County Archives. A woman at the desk hesitated when he gave her the property's address, her eyes darting toward a locked cabinet behind her. After a pause, she retrieved a folder. The papers were brittle, yellowed, and smelled faintly of mildew. The earliest record dated to 1842. The land had been deeded to the Methodist Church, which established the Ashbell Orphan Home on the site. No photographs survived, at least none in the folder, but newspaper clippings painted a picture of a grim institution. Reports of discipline that sounded closer to punishment. Illnesses, disappearances. By 1873, the home was under investigation for excessive mortality. The church dismissed all accusations as slander. And then, in 1881, the home was abruptly restructured. No reason was given. No children were named. But one scrap of paper stood out. It wasn't an official record, just a torn note, written in a careful but frantic hand. Do not go below. They hear us. They speak when the lights are gone. Back at the farmhouse, Thomas couldn't stop thinking about that note. He pried open the nailed attic door, boards snapping under the hammer. Dust and bat droppings rained down as the dark space opened above him. In the corner, beneath moth-eaten blankets, he found a leather-bound ledger. The ink had faded, but the dates spanned from 1865 to 1879, written by Reverend Josiah Crane, the man who had overseen Ashbell Orphan Home. The entries began innocuous. Lists of food, sermons preached, punishments delivered. But as the years passed, the writing grew frantic. Children spoke of the voices below. They claimed something in the basement called to them, promising warmth and safety if they only descended. The Reverend described nights when multiple children vanished from their beds, only to be found days later sitting against the bricked foundation wall, their fingernails torn bloody from clawing at the stone. In one entry, his handwriting broke into near-illegible scrawl. "They do not die. The earth drinks them, but the voices remain. God forgive me. I cannot silence them." Thomas closed the ledger, hands shaking. For the first time, he wished he had never stepped foot on this land. Thomas tried to stay away from the basement, but the house had a gravity to it. Every time he passed the cellar door, he felt pulled downward, as if the silence itself wanted company. Finally, he gave in. He set up a work lamp, its light trembling in the stale air. The bricked wall loomed in front of him, red clay sealed tight. But then he noticed something new. A fracture had split across the mortar, thin as a hairline vein, and from within that crack came a smell. Not rot, not mildew, something sweeter, sickly, like decayed fruit and old blood. He pressed his hand against the fracture. The wall was warm, not in patches, not from the lamp, but radiating evenly, as though something on the other side breathed heat. The carved word he had seen before, mercy, seemed to deepen, the grooves darker, as if they had just been cut. That night, his dreams burned with fever. He saw children in pale linen nightgowns sitting against the wall, whispering in unison. Their mouths never moved, but the words filled his skull. "Let us in." The next morning, Thomas visited the county library. He combed through microfilm reels of local newspapers. Most years in the late 1800s showed church gatherings, farm auctions, political campaigns. But 1879 was strange. An entire issue of the Chillicothe Gazette was missing, spliced out of the microfilm. When he asked the librarian, she shook her head. "Those pages were never delivered to us. Whole week just gone." But tucked in the obituary column of the following month, Thomas found a single line that chilled him. A closed funeral service for the children of Ashbell Home was held under the direction of the Methodist Conference. Attendance restricted to clergy only. No names, no cause of death, no number, just a vague, bureaucratic obituary. But the chilling phrase, "the children," hung in his mind. How many had been buried? And where? He drove back through the far fields at dusk. In the high weeds behind the barn he found rows of stones. Crude, unmarked, leaning like broken teeth. Someone had tried to erase them, but the earth never forgets. Back in the attic, Thomas returned to the Reverend's ledger. He flipped toward the final pages, his heart heavy. The bishop demands silence. We are to seal the doors, to wall the passage, to bury what cannot be sanctified. The children will not rest. Their prayers are not to God. They pray downward, to what waits in the soil. Promises them escape from hunger, from pain, from me. But I fear it lies. And yet, when I hear them sing, I envy them. The last entry was dated November 1881. After that, the handwriting ended abruptly. The ink blotched, smeared by something wet. Perhaps tears, perhaps blood. The Reverend had vanished from all public record after that date. The Methodist Church appointed another overseer, but only briefly, before the orphanage was restructured. In truth, it had been shut down. Thomas closed the book, his hands trembling. It felt less like a record and more like a confession no one had ever been meant to read. Rain hammered the farmhouse roof that night. Thunder rolled across the flat Ohio fields. Thomas sat in the kitchen, the ledger beside him, when it came again, the sound from below. This time it was louder, rhythmic, like knuckles on wood, but hollow. He forced himself to descend the basement steps. The lamp swung, shadows leaping across the brick. The knock came again. Not random, measured. 3 taps, a pause, then 2. A code. Thomas whispered through the crack in the wall, "Who's there?" For a moment, silence. Then, so faint he thought it might have been in his head, came the answer, "Mercy." His stomach dropped. The same word carved into the brick. The same word from his fevered dream. He backed away slowly, his breath shallow, his pulse in his ears. The house did not creak or groan now. It listened. The next day, Thomas tracked down one of the oldest residents in town. a widow named Eleanor Briggs, 94, who lived in a crumbling farmhouse of her own. She had been a child when Ashbell Orphan Home still stood. When he mentioned the name, her eyes filmed over. "You don't say that word," she whispered. "They bricked it for a reason." After coaxing, she told him what she remembered. Children from poor families, taken in by the church, fed but seldom loved. She remembered walking past the place and hearing voices at night, singing that didn't sound like hymns. It was like the ground itself was humming, like the cellar was a throat. When Thomas pressed her about the wall, she shivered. "I knew one boy who lived through it. Just one. He told me once. The basement wasn't built to keep things out. It was built to keep them in." She refused to say more. Before he left, she gripped his hand with surprising strength. "If you hear them, don't answer. That's how they get you." That night, Thomas woke to the sound of music. Thin, wavering voices floated up through the floorboards. At first, he thought it was the wind catching the gutters, but no, the tones were too deliberate. A hymn, old, but warped, sung in a language he couldn't place. He rose, heart pounding, and crept to the basement door. The air behind it was warm again, the sound stronger. Dozens of voices, children's voices, rising and falling like waves of breath. Against every instinct, he descended. When he reached the bricked wall, the song stopped instantly. The silence after was worse than the singing. Then came the whisper, "Sing with us." He bolted upstairs, slamming the cellar door. But even in the bedroom, even with a pillow pressed over his ears, he swore he could still hear the faint hum beneath his own heartbeat. Unable to endure the mystery, Thomas returned to the archives. This time, he pushed for restricted files. A reluctant clerk finally produced a map, an 1871 survey of Ashbell Orphan Home. The blueprint showed something terrifying. Beneath the basement was another chamber, narrow, windowless, marked only as prayer room. But there was no sign of stairs leading down. Only a hatch, a square etched into the foundation. Back at the farmhouse, Thomas searched. Hours passed before he noticed it. A section of floorboards in the kitchen slightly misaligned. He pried them up, revealing iron hinges black with rust. The hatch creaked open, exhaling a draft so cold it burned his skin. A ladder descended into darkness. He lowered his lamp into the void. The beam revealed stone walls, carved with crosses that had been violently scratched out. At the bottom, something moved. Not quickly, just enough to let him know he was not alone. Thomas fled, heart hammering. But instead of leaving town, he returned once more to the library, desperate for answers. In a locked drawer of correspondence, he discovered letters exchanged between church officials in the late 1870s. They spoke of disciplinary crises at Ashbell, of children who no longer prayed to Christ but to the voice in the below. One bishop wrote, "The reverend cannot control them. They gather at the hatch. They chant. They beg to be lowered. We cannot permit this contagion to spread. Seal the floor. Brick the cellar. Silence the home." The last letter, dated January 1882, read, "We have walled it. We have burned the beds. The earth will remember, but the church will not. Let no man break the seal." Thomas folded the papers back into the envelope with trembling hands. Every line confirmed it. The wall was not a repair. It was a grave. Thomas couldn't stop thinking about the hatch. That night, the floorboards seemed to breathe under his feet. He lit the lamp again, lowered it down, and forced himself to descend the iron rungs. The prayer room was small, stone-walled, damp with condensation. The crosses etched into the rock were jagged, desperate, each one scratched until the stone crumbled. On the far wall, a circle had been painted in ash, though time had blurred its edges. And in the center of the floor lay a mound of children's shoes. Tiny, decayed, leather curled like dried leaves. Some were blackened as if burned. Others were marked with symbols he didn't recognize. When he touched one, the room groaned. The wall above him, the bricked cellar, rattled as though hundreds of small fists were pounding in unison. He ran from the prayer room, slamming the hatch shut. But sleep never came. The next day he tried digging outside, near the crude gravestones. Only a few inches into the earth, his shovel struck something soft. He uncovered a fragment of cloth. Beneath it, a child's skull, jaw open as if mid-song. And beneath that more, row after row. Pit not of bodies but of fragments, as though the earth itself had chewed them, spat them back in pieces. When he dropped the shovel and stumbled back, the soil hissed. At first he thought it was the wind. Then it formed words. Mercy. He ran, dirt still under his fingernails, the skull's hollow eyes fixed in memory. Thomas demanded answers. He confronted townsfolk in diners, in church parking lots, on porches where the old men smoked in silence. But every face turned away. Finally, a retired pastor cornered him outside the grocery. His voice shook as he spoke. We do not speak of that place because speaking feeds it. The home was not abandoned. It was contained. If you break the seal, you invite them back. Who? Thomas asked. The old man's face twisted. Not children anymore. And with that, he walked away, leaving Thomas more hollow than before. That night, the hymn returned, louder now. The house shook with it. Plaster rained from the ceiling. The cellar door creaked open on its own. Drawn by something he could not resist, Thomas lifted the hatch once more. The prayer room pulsed with sound. Shadows shifted across the stone walls, though no one stood there. In the ash circle on the floor, the shoes had rearranged themselves into a pattern. A spiral leading inward. At the center, something wet glistened. He stepped closer, and the spiral whispered, "Sing." The lamp flickered, and then went out. Darkness swallowed him, but the voice remained, rising, splitting, multiplying. Hundreds of whispers, yet one. It spoke from beneath the stone, from beneath the soil itself. We were buried. We were silenced. You have heard us. Now you belong. Thomas clutched the ladder, desperate to climb, but his hands trembled too hard. In the blackness, he felt small fingers grip his ankles. Cold. Endless. Pulling. He screamed, but the house above stayed silent. The outside world no longer existed. Only the below. Days later, or hours, time dissolved. Thomas found himself back in the attic, the ledger in his lap. Pages he had not seen before now lay open, scrawled in frantic ink. They are not dead. They are the earth. They are hunger. When the wall cracks, the song spreads. If any man reads this, know you will not stop them. You will join them. The handwriting was not the Reverend's. It was his own, his name signed at the bottom. Neighbors saw no more of Thomas Ellery. The farmhouse windows grew dark, weeds choking the porch. Some say the county sent workers again, just as in 1934. Trucks came at night, men in plain suits unloading bricks. By dawn, the cellar was sealed again. Officially, the deed transferred back to the state. Another forgotten property. Another line buried in paperwork. But the townsfolk knew. They had seen the trucks, heard the faint music carried on the wind. Children in town woke crying that night, all murmuring the same word in their sleep. Mercy. This is where the story should end, buried again under silence. But a recording remains. On the night before he vanished, Thomas left his phone on the basement steps, captured hours of sound. At first, just the low hum of the lamp, then the knock, the hymn, and finally, the moment the voices swelled together, louder than thunder, louder than the storm itself. Mercy, mercy, mercy. The recording ends with a crash, a scream, and then nothing. The farmhouse still stands in Ohio, bricked, waiting, and if you listen closely on storm nights, the wind carries a song that no one dares sing.